Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Design Gym. My name is Anulfo Baez. I'm the Design Gym lead here. Design Gym is a prototype of the Design Studio for Social Intervention. Here you can do and learn design collectively. We also have classes that you can take, and we have a panel every semester. And this semester, we're talking about beyond the binary. We also have a chef in residence. Every semester we get a new chef in residence. This semester is Carmen Powell. Carmen cooked all the food today, so round of applause for Carmen. Thank you, Carmen, for everything you do for DS4SI in the community. And now I'm gonna hand it over to my colleagues Kenny and Judith, who's gonna talk to you more about the panel and introduce tonight's guest, Dr. Joy James.
Hello, everyone. Hi, everybody. Hello, Project South. Hello, AHA Lab, if you're on the Zoom as well. We're so happy to be co-hosting this wonderful event Beyond the Binary, looking at the binary of fascism and neoliberalism right now in these political times we find ourselves in. I thought I'd say a little bit as to why this particular topic, starting off this particular series. And for me, it really is a kind of desire to scratch an itch around the way in which political discourse, particularly in the United States around national politics, sort of falls into we either need to accept the neoliberal program of the Democrats in order to reject the fascist program of the Republicans, or we need to, or we by default accept the fascist program of the right, and we see the neoliberal program of the Democrats as some sort of better program or some better alternative. And I've just been seeing that happening over and over and over again for quite some time. And there never seems to be a space to think beyond it or to reject all of it or to question how is it that these are the limits of our political imaginary, or how is it that we always find ourselves coming back into this kind of political prison? And so I was talking with Judith, and I was like, when do we, under what conditions do we get to say no to it all? And often, whenever you pose these questions, there's something happens in our body where it's like we're asking ourselves to do something that's unthinkable, that's unintelligible, that's impossible, that to try to reject it all is somehow asking us to be impragmatic or to jump out of a real political project into some fantastical project. And so we're a design studio for social intervention. Whenever we find ourselves trapped in a habit of thought or inside of a sort of a prison of intelligibility, what we like to do is spend time there and say, like, what's keeping us from imagining otherwise? And so, and having an opportunity to start this series and this conversation with this topic and with Dr. Joy James. Let's give it up, y'all. Let's give it up. To be able to, I'm just so honored. I'm so honored in following Dr. Joy James's work forever and ever. Whenever I talk to Emery, one of the director at Project South, about these topics, I always say, man, we got to go to Joy. You got to look at Joy. Joy said that 10 years ago. It was Joy. You got to look at Joy. And so having Joy here on our couch with us at this moment is truly an honor. So I'm going to pass it over to Judith to say more about Joy James. Oh, I don't need to pass the microphone.
Good evening. I'm Judith Lehman. I'm the Ecologies of Thought lead here at DS4SI. Many years ago, I encountered a line in a David Whyte poem that spoke of a blade so sharp, it cuts things together, not apart. Joy James' voice is for me exactly such a blade, both in what she speaks of and in how she lets what must be spoken carry in her voice. Joy James is a political philosopher who works with organizers. She is the Ebenezer Fitch Professor of Humanities at Williams College. Her books include In Pursuit of Revolutionary Love, New Bones Abolition, Captive Maternal Agency, and the Afterlife of Erica Garner, and Contextualizing Angela Davis, The Agency and Identity of an Icon. She is the editor of the 2024 book, Beyond Cop Cities, Dismantling State and Corporate-Funded Armies and Prisons, as well as the forthcoming, it's not here because it's forthcoming, as well as the forthcoming edited volume, Confronting Counterinsurgency, Cop Cities and Democracy's Terrors, due out this summer, which the publisher describes as bringing together the voices of frontline activists, artists, and organizers from movements against militarism and state violence in the USA, Puerto Rico, Colombia, Palestine, Brazil, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and within prison walls. With gratitude for what you've already offered us through your words and through your writing, we welcome you and thank you for joining us here tonight.
You want me to move over too? This is on, right? Yeah. It's good to see you all, and I'm grateful for the invitation to be in conversation, right? Because that's when my brain lights up. You know, I mean, I can just think in solos, right? In isolation, and it usually leads to some level of depression. But from the conversations for the last hour or so, and just not eavesdropping on you, right? But just watching your connection with each other, it's been edifying, but also soothing, in some way healing. And I understand the topics, not completely, but I understand your desire to confront and unpack fascism, neoliberalism, and I would, I also would add, which is already there, liberalism itself, that how it can become performative and then take the reins of radicalism and steer it right back towards neoliberalism as it's paying homage to fascism and pretending that it's not. Over in the kitchen area, and thank you so much for the wonderful food and hospitality. Over in the kitchen area, there's a poster with Septima Clark, the civil rights leader, right? And I had to read it twice or three times because it states that she welcomes chaos. And usually that's what we flee from. Oh, thank you. She's like, here's a visual. But it opens the opportunity, as she says, to think more clearly. And again, to collectively think clearly increases the possibilities of us surviving the hunt, right? And not allowing the hunter or the predator to control territory any more than they need to, which is none at all, but any more that we can stop in terms of their capacity. I want to read a little bit, but I really want to talk and listen as well and be in dialogue. So I'm going to start with what I would call the preface to the preface. I've been trying to figure out what would be useful for the next book that's coming out on confronting counterinsurgency. And all the books, I think you're going to get a copy of. Do I have a copy of it? Nope, that one. There are multiple copies of Beyond Cop Cities that are available if you want them and stuff. So what we were doing, as an academic, you can flip money sometimes, I mean, legally, right? With the grant is that we spoke to a publisher in London, which is Pluto Press, and they said, well, if we put this much money on the table, X number of thousands of dollars, that we'll never be able to touch again, once they figure out how we're using or leveraging it. If you publish the books, then we will send them to the people who are incarcerated. We will give them to organizers. There's no revenues coming from these books that are going to any individual, right? So we keep trying to circulate it, because I'm trying to think increasingly, as I age and I move to getting off not just the scene, but, getting off the planet. How do we preserve the breadcrumb trail, right? Like, I don't know if you grew up on Hansel and Gretel, but they forced me to grow up that way. So the understanding that what we need to know in terms of logistics and how to get out of hell, right? Out of the so-called witch, or could be the wizard's house, that we have to leave discernible markers, right? Because a lot is being erased. It's not just Trump and company who are banning books. There's certain kind of books that are more radical or revolutionary that are also disappearing. I mean, a friend of mine got me to laugh like last week because they said that shadow boxing representations of Black feminists, something, I don't even remember the name of my books anymore, but it's on Black feminism, and it was done over 20 years ago. And they're like, did you know that the Naval Academy was told by the Pentagon to take it out of the library? And it was funny. I don't know why, but it was the absurdity of it, right? And it's like Black feminism is a threat, or presenting Black feminism. And I critique Black feminism like 24/7, like everything else. But it's the way in which our texts or ideas are supposed to disappear us. If they can't disappear us, then they disappear content. And we need content in ourselves, right? In zones of stability. So I'm going to read a little bit, thanks to Septima, all the inspirations, but also try to address, those two topics or three topics, right? Fascism, neoliberalism, and liberalism, and why we are in opposition of all three, but also there's zones that can capture our imaginations as well. So the preface to the preface. When you have potuses with Caligula vibes, you might want to reassemble your calendar so that you prepare daily and stay alert. Magnets on the fridge were essential before cell phones. They are still important signifiers if you are retooling your political alphabet of resistance to war, devastation, authoritarianism, as well as fascism on meth. Reportedly, Hitler's death armies were high a lot during World War II. So from Monday through Sunday letters, I begin to rethink and refocus on the days of the week, having a percentage of purpose. The first letters stand as shorthand for rebels or prep for captive maternals, embodied in function, not identity, and engaged in caretaking, protest, movement, marronage, war resistance, and sanctuary. So M for Monday, which stands for monsters, T for Tuesday, which stands in for terrors, W for Wednesday for wars, Thursday for tribunals, Friday F for freedoms, Saturday S for struggles, and Sunday S for sanctuaries. Everything stated above to mark the days and the wriggling from restrictions of liberalism, neoliberalism, and fascism is in the plural because no singular attempt or entity brings safety. Rainbow power is a possibility that you could also put on your fridge. Like on our fridge, there's a banner for freeing Leonard Peltier. And finally, Joe Biden did the right thing. But 50 years of captivity was to decimate not just Leonard, but to decimate all of us. Rainbow power, as Fred Hampton called it out, white power to white people, brown power to brown people, red power to red people, yellow power to yellow people, black power to black people, all power to the state. All power to the people, no to little power to the state. That the vision that we had of rainbow, right, has been decimated by fascist wars imperialist wars has been decimated by neoliberalism, but also by liberalism. And I track it in this way here. Fred Hampton left a gift. In fact, one of my comrades mentioned to me like a year ago, this is a phrase he said, he was in the Black Panther Party in Harlem. This is a phrase that he says he never hears again anymore, which is all power. Like the status of power, the attempt to take power, the attempt to expand power, but the concentration of power redirected only to the mass is not articulated in the ways that he thought in the 1960s and he saw and fought in the 1960s and the 1970s to be manifested. So this rainbow power starts with Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, and others. Fred Hampton, Mark Clark are assassinated by the FBI, Chicago police, in December 1969, December 4th. But the image and the idea continues of all power to the people, but this is the capture. Jesse Jackson also lives in Chicago, right? And so then the rainbow, nonprofit starts to expand. And I would argue, not to be snarky or mean, but there's a possibility that Jackson's opportunism back decades ago is an opportunism that reproduces itself in nonprofits today, right? And so Fred loses his life, as he said. He's not going to die slipping on ice. He dies for the people because he's high on the people, because he loves the people. And it's clear that he's an anti-fascist, that he's anti-militarist, but he understands the right to self-protection and self-defense. And hence, because of the articulation of the desire of love to be free, he's marked for death. When Jesse Jackson picks it up, it's a career opportunity. And also in the 1980s, he will present as a POTUS or a presidential candidate, right? Possible POTUS, which is never going to happen. But he can garner and he can collect not just monies, but our dreams. So before you get to Obama, you've got Jesse Jackson. And I remember, because I'm old enough, like I do dumb stuff, campaigning for him. And because I wanted to dream too, go ahead, laugh, but I wanted the dream too, right? And I wanted to contribute to some organized structure that is linked to the state, which is why you probably, everything that you've said in your emails about inviting me, it's to question maybe our desires. Like, we're smart enough to differentiate, we can recognize a fascist like a mile away or a country away or a drone strike away, right? Or an occupation or a genocide, X number removed. But the desire to believe that this democracy has not embedded terrors, that's the tripwire. Because our emotions are real and our desires are real. So Jesse Jackson's fulfilling that in the 80s, and then someone better, smoother, more articulated, well-degreed, from Columbia and Harvard will be a POTUS is Barack Obama. And so you can transfer your dreams that are articulated with love and sacrifice from Fred to your dreams to Jesse Jackson, to your dreams of Barack Obama. And again, like if I campaigned for Jesse Jackson, then in 2008, I voted for Obama. I voted for Obama. I didn't do it twice, but I understand that repetitive dreaming is a real thing. Because in the absence of an alternative, right, all power to the people is always going to filter into state and corporation and nonprofit as spokespersons for the people, as custodials for the people, as parental care for the people, right? So I don't like to read for like long pieces of time, but I do want to like follow this thread. We can say a lot about POTUS, you know, President of the United States right now, and how fascistic he is. But, you know, there are people who came before him, and there's a long line. And it didn't matter if they were from the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. The demand that the US remain an empire and the contempt for people of the so-called third world were following, you know, the defeat of the Nazis in order to free themselves from colonial power, that has never been stabilized in any decade, any century of the US project, of the Americana Pax, or whatever you want to call it. And when you get to Obama, our dreamscape was about somebody looking like us, somebody who seemed more authentic, somebody who came with Michelle. So that was a plus, right? Like, oh, verifiably, you know, Black, right? You know, but Black and striving, you know, from working class to Princeton, that's Michelle Obama, right? To Harvard. And he has more of a mixed family and more middle class, but it's this striving desire. I guess this is a long way of my saying that there's so few of us who want to sever from the project of being in the United States, who want to sever from the project of embracing a democracy. I find, based on my studies, that all the democracies that have been built on this land, stolen land, genocide of the indigenous, capture of African people on one continent, war on the water, and then render the, you know, remnants of captives on another continent as capture, that this has always been a death club. And we can like feed each other, we can comfort each other, we can have wonderful meals together. But sometimes, most times, I want to blink and pretend like it's not a zone of constant death and siege. That fascism is a bedrock. It doesn't have to look like Hitler. It just has to look like us. And when it does, we can brand it, we can sell it. We can first have, you know, dupe students to come from around the world and then pay all this money and then start, you know, Marco Rubio, who Trump used to call little Marco, is now big Rubio. Hi. We can think about renaming, we can think about alliance, we can think about moving around the chessboard we talked about earlier, that we're playing chess in hell. There's no winnable game inside the game, if that makes sense. So when I think of the captive maternal and the struggles and the sanctuary, it's constantly only moving into Maranage. Like, I see this as a maroon camp. And that if you can protect it and defend it, then it'll feed people in terms of their physical bodies, their spiritual bodies, their intellectual selves as well. So back to POTUS Obama. After 9/11, and I was upstate New York, I wasn't in New York City at the time. A lot changed, right? Because of Homeland Security and then the narrative of terrorism. So any insurgency is going to be marked now as terroristic, which is what POTUS is doing now, right? But we have to remember again the lineage. Before Trump, there were other presidents. And in 2011, the Obama administration agreed to do drone strikes to assassinate US citizens in Yemen because he linked them with Al Qaeda, but they never had to produce any evidence that there was actual linkage. I mean, yeah, there was a cleric, Al-Walik, I can't pronounce anything anymore. There was a cleric who did say death to Americans, but like the Klan has been saying that for centuries. Nobody drone striked him, right? So there's a way in which the imperial international project overwhelms anything that looks like a domestic project. So I don't even see domestic policy in the US as severed from its international policy. They're actually glummed together. And I know I've been on Black Power Media and other places where people talk about Black struggle and they talk about how we struggle internally in the US. I started with Fred Hampton, the Rainbow Coalition, but this is an international project. And the imperial violent wars that are waged abroad in Palestine and other sectors, right, are the imperial wars that are waged internally. And increasingly, there's a collapse of domestic and foreign. So when Obama and his crew meets every Tuesday to plan out drone strikes, in different ways, we could say they violated the Constitution, that we have a right to a jury, a judge before you can execute us, and that you can't drone strike us in another country, a foreign country. I mean, it's written in the Constitution. There's supposed to be some limitations of taking us off the planet. The text doesn't really matter if it's perverted increasingly over the decades. And it doesn't matter if the perversion comes from the Democrats, the Republicans, or a white president, or a Black president, or a woman president, or a male president, or a non-binary president. The state itself has a commitment to capture and control. So increasingly, it has to be fought. And what Obama put into play by bypassing the courts, it was not just one US citizen who was killed. There was, I believe, up to 4, including the 16-year-old son of the cleric. And the drone strike hit him 2 weeks after his father was killed. And he was coming back to the US to go back to high school, right? I could recount over and over these episodes of death, but you're already familiar with them. You know, I have my story, you have your stories. We put them together like a jigsaw puzzle. It is the picture of what this nation state is. So the question becomes, not so much in my mind, how we define fascism, or how we define neoliberalism, or how we define liberalism. I see all three tethered. I think the question becomes, even without your magnets on your fridge, how do we survive terror? It's obviously not going anywhere. And we're not, again, like, because I know Panthers, we know political prisoners, Mumia Abu-Jamal, you know, Noel works with him, he's one of the attorneys, right? Self-defense, including intellectual self-defense, is prohibited. So ejecting or pushing out hundreds of students who have not committed a crime other than the thought crime that you shouldn't commit a genocide. These are the times that we inherited, but we can't be surprised about these times, because these are the times we always had, right? And this may sound really weird, but there may be a comfort in that. They never flip this, they never flip the script. They use different language, like Obama, like hope and whatever, and the rainbow thing that he got, right? So Fred Hampton started with the Rainbow Coalition for loving militants, but understood the cost. Jesse Jackson picks it up for electoral and nonprofit gain. And then Obama picks up the rainbow image to be like that historical first Black president. And I would say under these conditions, you don't need another one, right? So I don't want to read a lot. I wrote a lot coming, you know, trying to, like, I don't know, be smart. But I want to say, as we already know. There will be high mental, emotional, and physical casualties for those people who love, because they will be seen as potential revolutionaries or insurgents, which does not make them terrorists, but resistors to the state and resistors to the corporation. You know, as the billionaire class that never existed when I was growing up consolidates. It may be more about power than it is about money for the people who already have the money, but there is a lust for power. And the way in which it's enacted and inflicted, it's just why I mentioned Caligula, right? The Roman emperor who was so sadistic, you know, that some of us, we weren't there, but we could recall the name, and we can understand the direction and understand the emotional deadness of people suffering. How you survive and mutate and create maroon sites and have babies and four-legged friends and care for the incarcerated and care for yourselves, that's always a puzzle. But it's always a puzzle that we're uniting and putting together. I would say there will be a sector of us, because there's always been a sector of us, Leonard Peltier, Dhoruba bin Wahad, people that I know who were in the Panthers, people that I know were in plowshares as pacifists. There will always be a sector of us who will risk the most. So I think, you know, in closing, so we have a collective conversation, I think it's really important, at least for me now, to think about connecting what I call the epicenter, the surface of political struggle, with the hypocenter, which is ground zero. And for me, everybody has their different kind of epicenter and a different kind of hypocenter. But for me, the hypocenter would be political prisoners, people who had to flee the country, or the pacifists now that are being pushed out, or the activists, organizers, environmentalists in Atlanta and Georgia who saw their comrade Tortuguita, you know, shot and murdered, shot multiple times, and then get arrested on bogus charges, right? RICO charges, and they're labeled terrorists, even though the police are the only ones, or the Georgia troopers are the only ones who killed. So if we were on the surface of politics, right, that is where the state would want us to remain. And if that's your comfort zone, there's no shame in that at all. Like decades ago when I was young, I would do things that young people do that I don't do now, because I have family obligations and other things, right? I would go, you know, to Panama before an invasion. I would be like on the continent, meaning Africa. I'd be like in Moscow doing whatever, not as a voyeur, but as somebody who's trying to learn and knit things together. Now I see myself on the surface doing tax, but the hypocenter, ground zero, those are the revolutionaries, those are the insurgents, and they can be pacifist or they cannot be pacifist. I'm not judging. I believe in agape and I believe in risk, right? We would have to bridge the surface to the interior. The interior can be the carceral zones, right? People are being deported, people are being disappeared, people are being sent to El Salvador who are not citizens of that state. Bukele is suave and supposedly, you know, I don't know what he's supposed to be doing with the vibes, but like the fashionable dictator saying, like, well, we can take more when Trump says you need 5 more prisons. And then Trump says we're going to have homegrown criminals sent, which I'm like, well, disproportionately incarcerated are Black people, Black women, you know, Black men, Black non-binary. So basically what he just called out was the N-word of like more deportations, but based on the fact that you're a criminal. What's a criminal? The POTUS is a criminal. Eric Adams is a criminal. But those who will be victimized by the state as it claims to be lawful will be on different levels of engagement. So writing a letter to an incarcerated person is important. Offering sanctuary is important. Protesting a genocide is important. But Caligula POTUS vibes, right, is that all of that will be criminalized. So what does it mean to be a criminal who loves? And I think that's kind of what you've built. And that means that there are zones of survival and agency. But I also believe that our casualties will be real. But that was inevitable. And hence agape is a gift, even with loss.
Yeah, cry a little bit. I said, we've had so much talks already. I didn't expect that. Sorry. Y'all, I am not a crybaby. That is not, that was really, I didn't expect to do that. Sorry. But thank you. Thank you so much. I don't even, I'm shocked. So thanks again. Thank you all for being here. Sorry for crying in front of you. And we wanted to, instead of do the classic stand-up Q&A thing, ask us to step into another kind of container. And I'm gonna ask Judith to explain what that container will look like. And for a lot of you who are used to coming to things at the design studio, you won't be shocked because we like to play with form.
Thank you. So rather than go into the prepared form of a Q&A, which our bodies know well and which we might be excited about or not excited about, we want to offer 3 different ways to metabolize, digest, chew on, embody the words that we just heard together, and to do that processing while we're here together rather than on drives home in traffic with the sort of loss of time and distance from one another. So understanding that everyone has their own ways of doing that, we have devised 3 to sort of hit some different spots, trusting you to find your way to one of those or to invent a small pocket of your own. In this front area, chairs will gather around, and Raquel, can you wave from the back? Raquel will gather here and will lightly facilitate a conversation with folks for whom talking with one another in that kind of group seems like a way to make sense together. At the side wall here, Mr. Maria, who is in the kitchen, is right here, will be over here with 2 large texts that are a transcript from a conversation that Joy had some time ago. If anybody is feeling the desire to read together, mark up words, be with another kind of anchored concrete text, Mr. Maria will make that space, will host that space. And then for those of you for whom movement and the body is the place to make sense and to kind of archive it, Alexa, who's standing up here or waving in the middle, will gather right in this entryway here and be in the entryway in the hallway with some lightly structured movement prompts, invitations. And we'll gather back here again in about half an hour Feel free to join one of those groups or have a bite to eat or move around. And rather than have you, Joy, stuck here in the Q&A spot, we invite you to also move around as you like. So we'll take about 3-4 minutes to find our ways to those groups, and then we'll gather back together in about half an hour. Thank you.
A round of hearty thanks and appreciation to Dr. Joy James for dropping us into such a wonderful, intimate, emotional place. So can we all thank Joy again? So we have copies of Beyond Cop Cities out in front. We might run out really fast, but if you want, you can grab one copy of this one. We have a small set of copies of Engage. And if you can't, if we don't have one for you, you can order it on Pluto Press. And this one is called Engage, Indigenous, Black, and Afro-Indigenous Futures. And what was the third one?
The one that's coming out, the posters there, it's confronting counterinsurgency.
And so if you would, when the new book comes out, you can order that one as well. Oh, and we're going to get books too. So it really means you should come back and hang out with us because we're going to have books. What else I think I turn it over to you. Did I? Oh, we want to talk a little bit about the next talk. Oh, and for a lot of people, this is your first time at the studio. Welcome and come back. We have this talk, but we also exist to design the lives to live, design the worlds we want to be in. Our motto, another everyday life is possible. If this is your first time, welcome. And if you are new, please introduce yourself to Onofo. Onofo is the director of the Design Gym, and he would love to talk to you and get you in our list. And I'm going to turn it over to Judith to talk about the next talk in the series.
So if you get on that list, you'll get an email about this. So just a heads up, the next talk in the Range of Motion Speaker series will be on May 20th, and that is Beyond Composition and Collapse, with the performers, writers, Matthew Goolish and Lynn Hickson, who are coming to us from Chicago from a many-year collaboration, first as the Goat Island Theater Company and then as Every House Has a Door. Their pedagogy and their way of making performance relies heavily on working in the space of the impossible, which seemed helpful to have some wisdom on working with, in, around, at the impossible. So May 20th, also in the evening, and see Onofo to get on our mailing list. Sunday Social News, who can take that? No.
No worries. Also, for anyone who hasn't been with us before, we've been talking together in community about the news because it's been so difficult and overwhelming to sort of try to consume the news alone. We are having Sunday Social News starting at 11. We're having one more session on Sunday at 545 Columbia Road, which is right next to the Strand Theater. So you can come and have toast and coffee and be in community. And we either engage with the news or not engage with the news and write your own articles and your own podcasts. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and have a good night.